Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of coding. This week, we're going to move into chapters 18 and 19, which focus on diagnosis coding for pregnancy, childbirth, and newborns. These are two chapters that highlight how important it is to understand who the patient is and why we had the encounter in the first place. Chapter 18, we're going to focus on pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum, with all coding applied to the maternal record. We'll work on obstetric codes that identify trimester, delivery status, and pregnancy-related conditions. We'll also be looking at some important health status codes, those Z codes that we were introduced to in the first week of the course. For example, we'll be looking at Z30, which is an encounter for contraceptive management. It's not for the pregnancy itself, but it's still part of the broader picture of maternal care. Understanding what these Z codes actually are and how they apply help us understand the bigger global picture. And we'll talk more about Z codes in just a little bit in this announcement. In chapter 19, we're going to focus on the newborn record. The newborn record, meaning that all the conditions that happen to a newborn infant. These codes are only used on the newborn record and describe conditions that begin before birth or within the first 28 days of life, even if they continue beyond that period. As we go through these two chapters, please bear in mind that we need to be clear on what's a maternal condition and what is a newborn condition. For instance, we can have newborns that are affected by alcohol use, and we can have pregnancies affected by alcohol use. These are entirely two different codes. In the real world, it's pretty obvious what record belongs to a newborn and what one belongs to the mother. Doing these exercises, think very critically about what record we're talking about. And here's an example with Z codes. Z38 identify newborn live born infants, and they're only used on the newborn record. They're not used on the maternal record. The outcome of delivery, it's only the mother that has a delivery. So these are the Z37 codes. They're only used on the maternal record. If you can keep those things in mind, read carefully, and remember in general that when we're talking about maternal conditions, we're largely talking about codes that begin with an O. So you look for main terms such as pregnancy complicated by, delivery complicated by. And these are all discussed in your book, and we'll discuss them in the video lecture as well. That's all I have for you, but that's quite a lot. It's going to be another challenging week, but already I'm seeing a lot of improvement in people's ability to read at a finer level of detail, read the tabular more closely, and things are definitely on the aggregate looking up for the entire class. Seeing a lot of improvement in all of you, and let's keep it going forward as we get into this next week. And if you need to ask any questions, please feel free to see me during office hours or use the link to schedule an appointment and we can meet and discuss what's troubling you. All right, have a good week and we'll see you online. Bye now.